Hello, it's Dawn Michelle and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about the decks that I worked with and other things that I got up to throughout the month of June. So let's go ahead and jump right into these decks. I have kind of divided them up into a couple of different categories based on how I worked with them. So the first three decks that we're going to talk about today are the decks that I used for my main reading decks. So these were the decks that I worked with in terms of setting up for my week ahead readings, any other readings that I might have done in terms of specific advice that I was looking for or specific situations that I was reading on. These were the decks that I went to for that. I also did use, this is obviously the Margaret Peterson Tarot. I also used this particular deck for quite a few sort of daily pull type of a deal where I would shuffle, pull a card, and then I would read the message and kind of let that card sit with me for the day. So this is Marlena's fault. So we were chatting back and forth about the Margaret Peterson and she had fallen in love with it. And she was like, you know, do you have it? And I said, yeah, I had it at one point, but I didn't really work with it very much. So I moved it along. Now I had the version that has the gray borders originally. And then she showed me this wine colored purple border one. And there was just something about the different border color that really clicked for me. It made the deck feel so much warmer. And I think that's part of what it was with the gray borders. It made the deck feel cold. And it's so funny, especially for me, because clearly, I like gray. A lot of my stuff is gray. My entire house is painted gray, inside and out. So it's funny that the gray border, I went back and forth, the gray border it didn't have any feeling to me, which is so bizarre because this artwork is just chock full of feeling. But it felt so cold and distant that I just couldn't connect with it. So I hemmed and hawed about it and I was like, okay, I'll try it again, but this time I'm getting this version. And this is, I think they call it the GB version. That's what it's listed as. This is the 20th anniversary edition. It's a different version than the gray bordered one that comes in the talk box. I also like that this one actually comes in a 2-piece box. Was never a fan of the talk box with this particular deck. I do love that this version has the full image depicted across the back. The gray bordered version has a, I think it was a white border around the back, or might have been gray, but either way, I love this backing with the full, the image stretching full across the card, and then we have these beautiful, beautiful borders. I do kind of want to edge this deck, and I think I'm probably going to edge it in a yellow because we have yellow in the text and a predominant yellow color on the back. This deck is quite large, so I do actually shuffle it sideways, but it's so flexible that I can literally riffle and bridge it sideways. So, and I can actually overhand it, which is amazing considering how big it is. So this deck, we'll just kind of flip through the cards as I talk about it a little bit. The guidebook is wonderful. And when you hear anybody talk about this deck, they usually mention the guidebook. And that is because the guidebook is written with so much depth and it's written in this very beautiful poetic language that it really just does add a whole nother layer to working with this deck. And maybe we'll pull a card here in a moment and read from the guidebook. The imagery is very intuitive for me. It's very rich. There's so much depth within it. And I found that it worked really well in just one or two of these cards at a time. I really did find that if I tried to do even a larger 3-card reading with this deck, I was overwhelmed by the amount of energy within it. And as you can see, there's a lot going on within each of these cards, and it feels like there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of flow, there's a lot of movement in these cards. And so if I got more than, really more than 2 on the table, it started to get really overwhelming for me. So I primarily used this almost like an oracle deck in that it was my focal point. But unlike an oracle deck where even though I'll use an oracle deck as a focus, it's not it's not the heart of the reading. It's the supporting energy to the reading, whereas this deck for me really served as the heart of the reading. The reading was whatever card came up through the Margaret Peterson. And then I used various other decks, which we'll take a look at here in a moment, to further expand upon that message. And so that worked really well for me, just having the single, really powerful energy of the Margaret Peterson as the, not just the focal point, but literally the heart of the reading. It was the foundational energy from which everything else expanded, and it worked really beautifully. I love this Seven of Coins. I love so much of the artwork in this deck. That this crone is it's so beautiful. I don't think the first time around I had this deck I was appreciative of that, and I really do attribute it to the different borders. It definitely gives the deck a totally different feel. Now, I don't have a copy of the gray bordered one anymore, and to be perfectly honest, I have no intention of getting it because this particular version, it has so much more feeling, so much more warmth, so much more depth to me, which is funny because it is the same deck. It's the exact same artwork, right? So is it really a question of the border color makes that big of a difference? I mean, I am real big into color and how color plays on a deck or in a card. And so I do think that the color of the borders does make a difference. I think even when we're looking at borders in terms of black and white borders, that totally makes a difference. And so I think that the border color does matter. But even if we take that out of the equation, I think perhaps I was just more in a space to be open to this artwork, to be open to the energy that's coming through this. Whereas maybe the first time I had the Margaret Peterson, I was in a different space, right? A different time in my life. And I think it was roughly a year or so ago when I got it. Might have even been like during the pandemic, who knows. I didn't have it for that long and I didn't buy it that long ago. So it wasn't like we're talking 20 years ago I bought this deck and then now have this new version, or rather old version because it's a reprint of the original version of this deck. And so I think it's probably, like most things, more of a reflection of where I am in my life versus where I was at that time. But this artwork to me, this deck with these wine-colored purpley borders feels so much more warmer and inviting and deep, and it has a completely different energy than the gray bordered one does. And for that reason, I would never take the borders off this deck. A couple of months ago, maybe a year or more ago, I did a video about decks I probably would never mod. It was an anti-mod video, and now that I have this would definitely be in that category for me of decks I would never trim. Now I may mod it because I may actually go ahead and make the color the edges yellow, just because I think we have the yellow text, the yellow frame around it. And then, like I said, this card, sorry. I love all the feet and handprints in this deck too. This card is amazing. I love it. So connected. But on the back, you know, yellow is a very predominant color within this deck. So I may yet edge it. So we'll take a look at how I worked with that with a couple other decks here in a moment. But before we do that, I do want to talk about a couple of other main decks that I worked with. Now, again, the Margaret Peterson I used in readings, but I also used as almost like a daily draw where I would pull a card and just sit with the message. This is the Cirque du Tarot. And this is a deck that I used for a couple of readings, but almost exclusively as a support for the Margaret Peterson. So it's a newer Llewellyn deck, and I have edged mine in this like kind of salmon-y orange color to pick up on the that color from the background. And because, you know, edging's important, right? I did a whole video on this deck and talking about the court cards, because they are different in this deck and how I actually quite appreciate the court cards. It follows a single character through the courts as they basically prepare for the show, and I love that interpretation for the courts, taking it out of the royal line or the family line and looking more about how we progress as individuals. So I really like that. I do quite like the artwork in this deck. I find it to be really fun and whimsical, but there's depth here, and that's not something that I was really expecting when I first purchased this deck. The Suit of Wands, and I think Lisa Robertson, and this is illustrated by Josh Tufts. Lisa Robertson's does a phenomenal job with her wands. I did have her Mermaid Tarot. I did rehome it only because I felt like it competed with the Mermaid deck that I really do love, and like I didn't feel like I needed a bunch of Mermaid decks, so I just have the one now. But she does a fantastic job with representing fire energy in the wands, and particularly in the Mermaid Tarot because it was fire underwater, which was just fantastically done. But I think she did a really good job with this deck too. And again, if you're interested in hearing more about the court cards, you can definitely check out that video. I'll leave it linked in the description box below for you. Like, check out this Eight of Swords. The person is like all bound up in the spider web. Again, such powerful wand cards in this deck. The Death card has the little spirit moving on, which is fantastic. The other thing I like about this deck is that the Ringleader and the Fool make an appearance throughout the deck. So we often see them repeated in cards. So we can kind of follow their journey as well, which is kind of cool. And the Fool is the character that's represented probably the most, I think, in this deck. So he's there, and like he's there. He's in most every card, and the card that he's not in, the High Priestess, who is the Ringmaster, and she's right there. You can see her in that card. She's the other primary figure that shows up in this deck. So it's really an interesting deck. I think the thing I was getting ready to say and then got sidetracked, it was that there's a lot of depth in this deck. This is the one card I don't like. If you want to hear more about my thoughts on that, check out that other video because I won't go back into it here in case you've already seen it. But there's a lot going on within each of these cards. So on first glance, you might look at it and go, oh, you know, it's just the Emperor here and he's huge. But then you can see down here, we have the Fool that is like teeny tiny and going the opposite way and almost kind of like making fun of this Emperor, like flexing his muscles and like showing his thing. And you can see there's even a spotlight on him. You know, outer strength maybe isn't always what's most important. So I like the little details that are in this deck. I like the depth. So yeah, it's an interesting deck. I do quite enjoy it, and it has surprised me, I'll be honest. I was, I got it thinking, oh, it'll just be a thematic Rider-Waite-Smith, which it totally is. But the theme of it adds an interesting layer to the deck, which does add an interesting layer to reading. So it's more, in my opinion, it's more than just a thematic deck. It adds depth, and it adds layer, and it adds a different perspective on the readings, which is quite interesting. Again, it has some of the most beautiful backs. I think I forgot to pull a card out of Margaret Peterson, but we'll do that here at the end. I'll just take you through a quick flip through. It's a typical Llewellyn guidebook, so we have the full page image on one side, and then the right up on the other. The Oracle deck that I paired with all these is an oldie, but a goodie, and it's an oldie, but it's totally new to me. So this is the Earth Magic Oracle cards by Stephen D. Farmer. This one is one of those oracles that was like on my list like forever, and I just like never got around to getting it. It is a older Hay House deck, so it has this like cardboardy kind of glossy cardstock, but it's not super thick. It's shuffleable. You can make it work. So this deck has, it does have beautiful artwork in it, and we've got this kind of beautiful arch thing, so it does feel like a little bit like you're stepping into a portal into these energies. We have the keyword at the top, or the title at the top, and then the keyword underneath, which is quite wonderful. I love when decks do that. One of my biggest Oracle pet peeves is when the creators just put the title of what it is on there and there's no keyword to tap into, because Dragonfly doesn't, I mean, that's not a great example because I can make a case for Dragonfly, but Dragonfly doesn't really do anything for me as a focal point. But Dragonfly, through the lens of emergence, does. You know, it's a little bit different with this deck because of it's very, you know, it's earth magic. It's very place oriented and into the earth. We have cave, we have forest, we have tree, and then we have things that kind of relate to the idea of working with earth magic. So ceremony. It has my name. I mean, I'll be honest, that's kind of one of the reasons why I bought it. It's got my name in it, but we have, you know, clouds and icebergs. So some of these things are, you know, I can definitely make a case for like a single keyword as meadow. And I probably wouldn't necessarily go to vulnerability. So that's always interesting. But it's a very clear reader for me. It's one of those kind of no nonsense kind of an oracle deck. A lot of times with oracle decks nowadays, like sometimes we get very thematic oracle decks that, I'll be honest, in my opinion, don't have a lot of use or substance to them. They're pretty and they might work really well for like just a daily draw, and I'm going to stick it up on my altar and I'm going to tap into the energy of whatever's on the card today, right? But sometimes they don't have any substance to them in terms of being able to work with a tarot deck or within a larger reading for me personally. And of course, as always, my monthly reflections and all of my views on my decks that I work with are all my own personal opinion. So take that with a grain of salt, because you should take everybody's opinion with a grain of salt. But I feel like a deck like this is a bit more versatile. I could use this as a daily poll, and I could put it up on my altar space and go, look, it's a really pretty autumnal equinox, you know, and the idea is release and there's beautiful trees. Like I could totally do that with this deck. However, I can also use it as a very functional part of a tarot reading for a, you know, focal point, or to further expand upon or maybe clarify a card. I just feel like sometimes these older decks, even though they maybe aren't as stunningly illustrated as some of the newer stuff that comes out, sometimes they're just a bit more substantial in my opinion. And again, that's just my opinion, but I do really enjoy this deck. It's definitely one I'll be keeping because I do feel like even though some of the, okay, so like some of the cards, this is not my favorite. I mean, I love that there's a fairies card, but the imagery is just kind of not my favorite. But like, it's beautiful. It's substantial, and it really does work. It's a very versatile working oracle deck, as opposed to something that's maybe just say a beautiful affirmation deck. And there is a time and a place for that. Don't get me wrong. I love beautiful affirmation decks. I use them. I do tend to kind of put them up on my altar. Ooh, I don't want to put that away yet. But as far as working within the constraints of my tarot practice and decks that I'm working with, I want an oracle deck that has some substance to it, and some balance is great. So there's always that. The guidebook is nice. You get just a little, you know, little black and white thumbnail. It has the title and the keyword in here, and then it talks a little bit about what the actual earth thing that you're seeing is. So like it talks about, you know, lakes here, and, you know, then it talks a little bit about more of the sort of message of it. And then we have a wrap up at the end, which is kind of more of the divinatory message, this italicized portion here. And I did dip into this a little bit here and there just to get a little bit more information, but I didn't need to. And for me, that's key with an oracle. If I can use it without having to be reliant on the guidebook, to me, that's a good oracle deck. This should be here if I want it and I need it, but it should not be, in my opinion, a required reading to be able to use a deck on a daily basis. So that's just my personal opinion. I don't mind if I got to read it once to kind of get the feel of the deck, and I always do. Even with oracle decks, I tend to read them through at least once, or at least glance through every card at least once, but I don't want to be reliant on it, but that's just me. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how I actually use these cards. And maybe, I'm not gonna pull a whole bunch of cards, but maybe we'll do one little reading from the Margaret Peterson in case you haven't seen it before, and in case you are unfamiliar with her writing style. So let me show you how I've been kind of working with this deck, or these decks together, because I think you'll be surprised. I was surprised by how well they actually read together, because when I first pulled these out and I was like looking at these two decks going, oh man, that's so different. I don't know if this is gonna work, but it totally did. So I pulled 1, card from the Margaret Peterson. Again, this was the heart of my reading. So this Ace of Coins, this would be what the reading is. And then I would use, or what the reading is about, or what it's trying to tell me. And then I would use the Cirque du Tarot to further flesh out that reading. And I generally did it in this kind of a configuration, although depending on how I was feeling, sometimes I would pull, you know, 2 cards to look at through the Cirque du Tarot. Sometimes I would pull 4. It just kind of depended on how I was feeling. And then always what I'm doing is I'm looking through the reading as the Ace of Coins is the answer to the reading. That's it, right? That is the message. I could just sit with just that and not have to pull any additional cards. But I like having the Cirque du Tarot to kind of pull out some deeper layers from that and to help me look at it through some different lenses. So if I look at the Ace of Coins through the lens of the Five of Swords, that would be a cool change for swords, shadows instead of swords. Anyway, if I'm looking at this Ace of Coins and I'm looking at like the full potential, let's just read, because I said I was going to do that and I keep forgetting. Ace of Coins, let's just take a look at what she has to say. So, to bring forth life, just as the whole tree is contained within the seed, the Ace of Coins contains the entire potential of the earth element. Growth, nourishment, the plant and animal kingdom, the visible creation within its potential of becoming, the material realm, profit, security, the physical, and the organic. All of the riches of the earth are contained within those opportunities you are able to seize. A time for new projects. Trust in that which you nourish. Wishes condense. An opportunity to plant a seed. Give the body everything it needs. Beautiful writing in this guidebook. So I'm looking at it, that energy of like the full potential of what I can create here, right? And then I'm looking at this Five of Swords going, okay, there's a lot of full potential there, but I need to be aware that there's going to be challenges within this journey too, right? It's not going to be all roses all the time. I'm going to have to do the work to get to this full embodiment of this full potential, or to bring it fully into being. I'm going to have to do the work, and that means that there's going to be challenges that I'm going to have to face. And then I have the Temperance card over here, which is going to remind me that I do also need to keep things in balance, and to keep in mind, you know, particularly if we were looking at this, say it was a new project, right? Coin suit, new project. There's going to be some challenges along the way, but I'm also going to have to keep in mind that I need to keep some moderation in mind. I need to keep some balance in mind. I can't just full on dive into all of this, bringing this Ace of Coins into full fruition without recognizing the challenges that I'm going to have to face and the balance that I need to incorporate in order to make that happen in a healthy way. So that's kind of how I would use these together. And then a lot of times I would also pull a Earth Magic Oracle card as a kind of wrap up or takeaway message. So here we have Mountain for strength, and I'd usually just do this little number here. And this is kind of the foundational or takeaway message of what I'm going to need to accomplish this, right? So what I need to accomplish this work that I want to do here is strength, and I can pull that strength through the energy of the mountain. Okay, so just kind of put them all together so we can do our kind of traditional 3-card flip through, so you can kind of see how these decks kind of look together. This is one of those instances where I am kind of pairing tarot and tarot, but I am kind of using the Margaret Peterson as a wooden oracle, as in it's the focal point. However, as I said in the beginning, it's not just the focal point, right? It goes so far beyond that. It's the heart of the reading. It's the answer to the reading. And then everything else tells me how to get there. And so I really do enjoy it. Now, I don't think, again, interesting talking about borders, that I don't think that this would actually work very well with the gray bordered version of the Margaret Peterson. Now, if you have the gray bordered version of the Margaret Peterson and the Cirque du Tarot, I would love to hear if you ever pair those decks together and how they work for you, because I think that would be really, really interesting. So yeah, just they're beautiful together. And I do love how the Margaret Peterson has like all that depth and all of that richness and emotion and layer to it. And then we kind of get a little bit of that through the Cirque du Tarot, but on a little bit less dynamic level. trying to think the right word there, a little bit less dynamic level. It's there. The depth is there. The richness is there. The layers are there. It's just on a little bit less of a dynamic level than the Margaret Peterson. I don't want to say surface level because I think that's kind of robbing the deck of some of its potential there, but it definitely does have some interesting things going on within it, but it's just kind of like taken down a notch from the Margaret Peterson, if you will. But they both have a lot of beauty and a lot of depth, and there's a lot of places where the colors really do intermingle very beautifully together. So if you are someone who follows color in your readings, you know, it's definitely something you can do with this particular pairing. Okay, so those were my main reading decks for the month of June. We had the Margaret Peterson Tarot with the Cirque du Tarot and the Earth Magic Oracle. So moving on to kind of a weekly practice that I have is the Simple Sunday readings. These are spreads that I post in my public Facebook group, and it's just a 3-card simple reading to help you kind of connect with yourself, your practice, and your decks on Sunday or whatever day you choose to do it on. I do mine on Sunday. And for that, this month, I worked with the Pamela Coleman Smith Tarot. And it's funny because I used every single RWS deck I think that I owned this month, with the exception of the Centennial. So it was an interesting month. And I paired that with the Magical Herb Oracle. This is a kind of a favorite in my collection. It works so well with so many of the decks that I have. So before we kind of jump into the pairing, we'll just talk real quick about each of the decks. Here's the beautiful backs on these ones. I know I've shown them before, and I've edged mine in green, which is beautiful. I love this deck because I love the simplicity of the artwork. It has this beautiful kind of parchment or grungy almost kind of background. We have the simple flower, and then we have the keyword associations represented visually through the white imagery on the cards. So here we have yarrow, and that's the plant, and then for open, which is the keyword, we have the key. I love that they're taped down. It's just like aesthetically, this deck is super beautiful, but it also reads really well. It's a very clear, very succinct reader, and I never struggle to understand with what this deck is trying to tell me. The guidebook is quite lovely, but honestly, I don't use it. Like the keywords and the imagery is totally enough for me to work off of with this deck. So I paired that with my new Pamela Coleman Smith Tarot. I believe that's the name of it. I have edged mine in gray because it's a gray wash deck, which is absolutely beautiful. I did a whole video on the RWSs that I now currently own, as I bought several versions of the RWS. This one has become my favorite, to be perfectly honest with you. It's gray and dingy and washed out, and I just kind of love it for that. and I love the cardstock. This deck has such a beautiful shuffle. It's just, yeah, just a beautiful shuffle. Okay, so I did with this one my usual kind of 3-card pairing. I was doing it with the spread, so the center card, I just used that position with the Oracle deck. It's a bit slidey though, to be perfectly honest, but it shuffles beautifully. So anyway, I had my magical herb in the middle, and then my Pamela Coleman Smith around it to get the fuller expression and to answer or respond to the prompts in the individual positions. I did also pull out the Pamela Coleman Smith just to play with, just to do additional readings with from time to time. It's an absolutely beautiful version of the Rider-Waite Smith. I love it. It does have a definite kind of grungy feel to it to me, which I quite love. It kind of has a little bit of like a 90s vibe to me, to be perfectly honest. And Mags recently did a tag about that, and I want to do a VR to that. But like here we have flow between the Magician and the Queen of Swords. I mean, I think it works really well because we have the Rider-Waite Smith is a very, in my opinion, a very stripped down, bare bones version of the tarot, right? It's not layered with any sort of thematic elements to it. Oh goodness, the cleanse is upside down. You know, like the Cirque du Tarot that we looked at, where it's, you know, it's the tarot, but it's viewed through the lens of that circus energy, whereas the Pamela Coleman Smith is just the tarot. There's no additional thing layered over the top of it. I mean, you could make the whole argument for the astrological and, you know, elemental and all of that, but in my opinion, it's bare bones tarot, right? It's tarot without a theme layered over the top of it. And so it's very clean in that way, and I feel like it worked really well with the magical herb, because that to me is also a very clean, very clear reading deck, as the Pamela Coleman Smith is. So these two decks together, just like bam, there's your message. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There's no second guessing the reading. It was like I could put these cards down and know exactly what message I was getting without a lot of fuss. And some days I just really, really need that. So, okay, so that was the deck that I used for my Simple Sunday readings, the Pamela Coleman Smith Tarot and the Magical Orb Oracle. So now let's talk about a couple of decks that I just used for random readings. Again, like I said, I was playing with all my RWSs this month. So I had the Tarot Vintage, and I paired that with the Pythia Botanica Oracle Volume 2. So the creators of this deck came out with a second edition of it. Not a second edition, because it's got different cards. The second, as I said, the second volume of it. And so it arrived in June, or at the end of May. I can't remember which. Anyway, I decided to go ahead and play with it. And I found that it actually pairs beautifully with the Tarot Vintage. Now, again, this is another Oracle deck that just has the plant, the keyword, and then the flower. So clearly I had a theme going on this month. It was either dark and moody circus or very clean and clear, no muss, no fuss kind of energies. Anyway, again, same as the two decks we just looked at, right? Very clean, very clear, very to the point type of a message that I get from these particular decks. It's just a different coloration. It has a different kind of energy, whereas the previous two that we looked at, again, felt a little bit kind of grungy, a little bit kind of 90s to me. This one feels a little bit more like, a little bit more modern, to be honest. I think it's because it does have that kind of like antiqued vintage look, but it feels very modern. This is not vintage as in true vintage. This is vintage as in modern, made to look vintage, right? If you know what I'm talking about, not in terms of like decks, but like, I don't know, decor or fashion or something like that. Like, I'm the worst person to talk about fashion, but just kind of in that, when they take things that are like brand new but made to look old, right? Like every time I buy a pair of jeans with holes in them, my husband always says, I could have done that for you, right? Because that whole idea of taking something new and making it look worn, that is what the Tarot Vintage is. And it's the color palette of it too that lends that energy, because it definitely has a more modern color palette, I think. And I do enjoy that because it has a different energy to it. And let's just kind of talk about this deck in particular for a moment. I gotta pick up the card I dropped on the floor. Okay, so, occasionally when I come across the cards that have different things on them, born through forms, when one of those shows up in a reading, it does kind of take me, it encourages me to take a moment and really look at the reading, to really look at what is this card trying to tell me, like knows for things. But then sometimes we get just the single keyword that's like hush, right? It's just shh, be quiet, take a minute. And I like that. I like the different types of keywords that are in this deck. I mean, I think the artwork is beautiful and all that, but it really is about the keywords. This one says closer focus. So if this one pops up in a reading, with the Two of Wands here, I'm going to be like, okay, take a closer look, pay more attention. There's something that you need to focus on that you're not currently seeing, right? So there's quite a bit of depth in here, and something like that I can get really quickly. Then you have something like this where salvage seeds that'll pop up that I'm like, okay, I need to think about that now. I need to kind of take a minute or sever light, and see what comes out of that for me. So it's interesting because it is kind of both. It's clear and it's not clear. It has cards that I'm like, bam, get it, intuitive, it's there. And then there are other cards that I'm like, ooh, I need to sit and think about this for a minute. And for me, that's the cards telling me this is a reading that's clear, it's to the point, and here we go. There's a message, let's move on. And then there are other times where it's like, no, let's stop for a minute. You need to really look a little bit closer at what's going on here. And so I really appreciate that about this deck. That may not be the intention, and I may be reading way more into this deck than was ever intended, but that's how I've been working with it. Those two boxes do not go together. Here's a beautiful box on this particular deck. And of course the guidebook is lovely. We just have a little message. I mean, it's really kind of all you need. I love the way this creator writes. I have all of their decks. This is one of those creators that I collect, and I have and use some more than others, all of their decks from Layla and Olive. Okay, so the Tarot Vintage, just real quick, I dropped the Empress, need to grab her before she goes wandering away. I showed this deck in my RWS video. I have edged it, which I absolutely love, to match that rose or the lily. Is that the rose? Yeah, the rose. I think it just came out perfect. Anyway, I kind of dig this deck. I really dig the coloration. I wasn't sure when I first got it if I was gonna really like it, but it's something a little bit different. It does have a totally different feel to it than my Centennial or than my Pamela Coleman Smith deck. And so, yeah, I kind of dig it. And I feel like there is room in my collection for all of these RWSs and in my practice for all of these RWSs, because I use them in slightly different ways, because each of them have a slightly different feel for me. But the thing I do really love about it is it does still feel very bare bones tarot. So when I really just want the bare bones of things, and I don't want to add a bunch of layer or a bunch of theme onto my deck, I can go to something like this and I can still get a little bit of a little slightly different energy, but it's still the bare bones tarot, right? And if I want to layer in additional energies or themes, I can also do that through a second deck, through an oracle deck, and just add a hint of that in there. Okay, so that's the Tarot Vintage and the Pythio Botanical Oracle Volume 2. Okay, now we're going to talk about two other decks that I used for additional readings this month. And I did a whole video for my members on how I've been working with these two decks, but just to kind of give you a quick breakdown, this is the original Rider-Waite-Smith. I showed it in the RWS video that I did. I have since trimmed this and I have edged it in like this yellowy color. I do really like the coloration on this deck. Again, it has a totally different feel than the other decks that I have been working with. And I used this deck in a reading where this deck for me represents the mundane. It's kind of like what's going on in the here and now. That is one of the things that I've learned to really come to appreciate about Pixie's artwork, which actually came out of my work with the Thoth, and I talked about that again in that video. So I won't kind of rehash it here, but this is the deck that I use when I want to like just get right to whatever it is that's going on, very much in the mundane realm of things, and it works beautifully for that. And I paired that with my trimmed Thoth. So this is the large Thoth. I've trimmed mine down to be completely devoid of title and keyword. I've edged it in this beautiful bronzy kind of color, and I love this deck trimmed down to just being borderless. I mean, I do actually appreciate the keywords on the Thoth, and I do work with them and I do use them. But there is something about the deck, the art, I should say, completely free of the borders and the text that just makes it feel to me all the more powerful. And how I've been working with this deck and this copy in particular is that I've been using it to explore the higher expression of whatever card I pull from the RWS. So, right, I have this Knight of Swords here and I'm looking at the higher expression of it. So I'm looking at this Three of Cups, right? And that's kind of how I've been working with it, is just reading with them together. So anyway, that is the two decks that I kind of worked with for what I call a higher expression reading. And it was the original RWS and the Thoth Tarot. So before we get into our monthly medicine decks, I just want to real quick mention this little dude. This is the Aquarian Tarot in a tin. I do have the full-size version of the Aquarian Tarot, but I purchased this one. I think I mentioned it in a member live, or it was a weekly wrap up. Anyway, I did mention this deck to members that when I first got it, I was like, it's not being very nice. I used other words, but I said it's not being very nice. And it was just like hanging out on my desk, and I kind of feel like the deck was like, stop just messing around with me. Like, will you take this seriously? And the reason I bought this was because I was like, I thought it would be nice to have just a different kind of tin deck to take with me places, right? Because I have the Centennial and I have the Morgan Greer, and I kind of felt like I just needed the Aquarian to kind of round out that collection, because this deck has a totally different energy for me. Again, it's an RWS deck, but unlike the actual RWS, this has a layer over the top of it. This has an energy. It has a kind of a feeling of its own that I think comes through the artwork. And we weren't really getting along at first, and I think that's because I was just messing around with it. And it was like, stop messing around with me, right? Totally personifying my deck here. Anyway, so I was like, you know, I think I'll take this one to the bedroom for a while. And because I do a tarot before bed pull every night, it's usually a little 3-card reading. I have been using my Centennial in a tin for like, well, it's not in a tin anymore, but for months and months and months. And I tend to use my little decks for this because I'm doing it on my bed, and it's just, you know, it's just a little thing, right? It's a little before bed reading. So I took it in there and I thought, you know, I'll give it a try. And I spent some time with it. I shuffled it like I was watching like YouTube and whatnot, right? I shuffled it and I spent some time with it, and then I started pulling cards with it before bed and stuff like that. And we've kind of had, we've made it. That's just a little Aquarian in a tin that I just wanted to give a little shout out to. Okay, and we're gonna wrap things up talking about my monthly medicine deck. So monthly medicine is a guided tarot practice that I do in my members section of my channel. And if you'd like to find out more of that, there's links in the description box below for you. So I use the Tarot de St. Croix and the Messages from the Light. Now I do think the first week of monthly medicine, I used the Earth Magic, and I wasn't really feeling it with the Tarot de St. Croix. So I switched to the Messages from the Light, which is just one of my kind of most used kind of go-to oracle decks. Again, like the Earth Magic, I feel like it's really, really versatile. It does have a little bit of light and shadow in it, but it's one of those decks that I can use for just about anything. It does pair well with a lot of, like aesthetically speaking, with a lot of my decks. But really what I'm looking at when I'm using this deck is I'm tapping into these keywords and this artwork, because I get so much out of this artwork, and these keywords are so fantastic. They're just always so on point for me when I pull them into a reading. And I love how open and expansive the keywords are as well. And it's just, you know, it's just a little mass market oracle deck from US Games. Beautiful, beautiful deck. And it works so well for so many things. I use it for readings. I use it for meditation. I use it for mindfulness. I use it for daily card pulls. Pretty much anything you could possibly use an oracle deck for, I have probably done with this deck, because it's so versatile. It works for so many things. So I used this as pulling most every week during the month for my main card pull for our monthly medicine readings, and then we do the tarot cards, which we expand upon that with our medicine reading every week. And so for that, I was using the Tarot de St. Croix. This is the second edition, which is borderless, which I love this edition. This is one of those decks that like is kind of probably a forever deck for me. I don't imagine it ever leaving my collection. For me, it's a deck that really represents my personal path, which is why I chose it for the monthly medicine in June, because that's what we were exploring, was our personal path. And this deck for me just really encompasses the whole of that. And it's the closest tarot deck that I have that does align with what I feel my personal path is at this point in my life. So I love it for that. I love the interpretations. I think they are so smart. The little guidebook is fantastic. I like it enough that it is like actually living in the bag with the deck. It does come in a really nice box, but I like my bags. Anyway, so I made the bag big enough to accommodate the deck and the book, because the book is quite wonderful, and I really, really enjoy Lisa de St. Croix's interpretations of the tarot, and I love the way that she's depicted the tarot. I just think it works really, really well. So it's a beautiful deck, and I really loved working with these two decks together. I mean, we could do a little flip through, but you know, they're gorgeous. And I love the way that, again, I got that really succinct keyword through the messages of the light, and I could really expand upon that really beautifully with the Tarot de St. Croix. It just worked stunningly. I love these two decks together. So those were the two decks that I used for the monthly medicine in June. We had the messages from the Light Oracle and the Tarot de St. Croix. All right, so now we're at the point where I would generally share with you my tarot journal, but I don't have that to share with you this month. I did do a little bit of work in my digital tarot journal, and I did do my monthly medicine in my tarot journal. But to be perfectly honest with you, I did most of my tarot journaling just in a regular old journal. And I think that is because I'm planning to use a paper journal next month, because we have some really cool stuff we're doing in monthly medicine. And we're going to be working with connecting with guides in terms of like other things, like, you know, perhaps fae or animal or ancestors or angels or deity or whatever people want to do. I'm personally going to be doing fae work, so I'm going to be doing a paper journal in July, and so I feel like I was kind of like moving towards that. So I actually just ended up writing my reflections and my tarot pulls in my actual devotional journal, which is where they just ended up, and that's totally fine. And it's just writing, so I have nothing pretty to show you. So we're kind of just gonna skip that this month, because I don't really have anything to show you. I did do a lot of tarot work, but again, it's just all handwritten stuff in a plain old journal. Next month, I will hopefully have my fae journal to show you. That will be really fun, so I'm definitely looking forward to that. If you want to join in with us on the monthly medicine, again, it's just offered through the membership on my YouTube channel. There's a link for it in the description box below. And it's just a guided tarot practice where we have themes and prompts that we work together through as a group. We also have a private Facebook group that we share our readings and chat as well, and work through practice together. So I'll have links for that along with everything that I've shown you in this video in the description box below. So I think that's it for me today. I hope that you all had a wonderful June, and I wish you many blessings moving into July. As always, thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.